People think a simple woman can never surprise the world, but what if I told you that one ordinary woman walked into a job interview where everyone mocked her, only to solve the CEO's biggest problem in just seconds, leaving the entire boardroom frozen in disbelief? So before we begin, make sure you watch this story till the end, because what happened next shocked an entire company and it might inspire you in ways you never expected. And if you want more true-to-life stories like this, make sure you follow, like, and subscribe, because every viewer here matters and your support keeps stories like this alive. Now let's dive into the unbelievable journey of a woman everyone rejected before she proved she was the smartest person in the room without ever raising her voice. She walked in quietly, dressed in clothes too simple for the modern corporate world where appearance often overshadows talent, her shoes slightly worn, her hair neatly tied back without the shine or expensive styling others showed off, yet her eyes carried a calm confidence that no designer outfit could imitate. And the reception staff looked at her with that familiar judgmental stare that people reserve for someone they assume has already failed before even trying, whispering among themselves about how she probably applied for the wrong job or didn't understand the level of professionalism the company expected, but she ignored it all and simply smiled because she had come with one goal and one purpose: to try. Inside the waiting room, 10 candidates sat scrolling through their phones, wearing crisp suits, polished shoes, expensive perfumes and confident smirks, and the moment she took a seat the room fell oddly silent, as if they were collectively surprised that someone like her was competing for the same position they believed they deserved more. But she didn't look at any of them. She simply folded her hands, closed her eyes for a moment and breathed slowly, gathering her thoughts while the others laughed quietly, comparing their degrees, their previous jobs, their fancy internships, completely unaware that the real test ahead would not be about who looked the most qualified but who could actually solve a problem no one else had been able to understand. When the interviewer finally called her name, even the candidates exchanged glances, almost insulted that she was being allowed into the same interview as them, but she walked in with steady steps, not nervous, not pretending, just completely grounded in her simplicity, as if she had already accepted that whatever happened inside that room would define her future and she was ready for it. Inside, the CEO and 4 senior managers sat around a large polished table, the CEO looking frustrated, tapping a pen repeatedly as though something was troubling him far beyond this interview, and she greeted them softly, her voice calm but firm enough to show respect and confidence without trying to impress. Yet immediately one of the panel members raised an eyebrow, looking at her resume, questioning her lack of prestigious degrees or high-profile experience, wondering out loud how someone with such a modest background expected to qualify for one of the most competitive positions in the company. She didn't try to defend herself. Instead she simply said she believed skills, not appearances, prove ability, and her quiet assurance unsettled them because they expected nervousness, excuses, or insecurity, but what they got was honesty and strength. The CEO, annoyed from the morning stress, decided to test her with the one problem none of the other candidates had been able to crack, the problem that had delayed the company's biggest project for months, the problem that had experts scratching their heads and costing the firm enormous losses. He slid a paper toward her, asking her to explain how she would fix it, expecting her to panic like the others, but she didn't even blink. Instead she studied the problem with a level of focus so sharp that the entire panel leaned forward, surprised by her sudden shift from gentle calmness to analytical intensity, and for a long minute the room felt completely silent except the soft rustling of the paper as she traced her finger through the figures, lines, and errors hidden within the data. Then with shocking confidence she pointed out the issue, explained the solution in simple language, and proposed the exact steps needed, not in minutes, not in hours, but in seconds, and the CEO, who had spent months searching for a fix, froze as if time itself stopped in that moment because she had solved what industry professionals couldn't. The senior managers stared at her, speechless, some even rechecking the documents to confirm she wasn't guessing, but she wasn't. She was precise, accurate, and completely correct, and as they looked at her in disbelief they realized the candidate everyone underestimated had just done something extraordinary, something that proved talent has nothing to do with appearance. The CEO leaned back, stunned, and for the first time that morning he smiled, because this simple woman had just saved his company months of delay and millions in loss, all with a single moment of pure brilliance. The room remained silent after she finished speaking, a silence so deep that even the ticking of the wall clock felt louder, and the managers who moments earlier doubted her were suddenly searching for words, trying to understand how someone who appeared so simple, so ordinary, could dissect a complicated corporate crisis with such clarity and ease. And while they exchanged confused looks, the CEO leaned forward with his elbows on the table, staring at her as though he was seeing something rare. Something he didn't expect when the day began. He asked her how she figured it out so quickly, and she replied gently that sometimes the biggest problems remain unsolved because people look at them with too much stress, too much pressure, and too much ego, whereas she had nothing to lose, no pride to protect, so she simply looked at it with calmness and logic, and hearing this, for the first time the CEO felt a strange respect for her simplicity, realizing that maybe the corporate world had complicated things that should have remained simple. One of the senior managers, feeling embarrassed because he had criticized her qualifications earlier, cleared his throat and tried to regain professionalism by questioning her approach again, hoping to find even a single flaw in her explanation, but each time he attempted to corner her she responded with reasoning so balanced, so precise, that every rebuttal he prepared dissolved before he could speak it, and while she sat there calmly, the panel began to notice something even more surprising. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, she wasn't showing off, she wasn't trying to look smart, she was simply being herself, answering with the soft honesty of someone who genuinely understood what she was talking about and didn't need fancy words or technical jargon to prove her worth. Meanwhile, outside the interview room, the other candidates were still waiting, laughing among themselves, joking about how she must be rejected already, completely unaware of the storm building inside, the storm that would flip their expectations upside down in ways they never imagined. Back inside, the CEO asked her another question, a problem related to team conflict, expecting a logical but cold response like the ones he heard from the other candidates, but her answer was different, deeply human, almost emotional, yet powerfully intelligent, because she explained how a team fails not because of technical inefficiency but because no one listens, no one notices the quiet workers, and no one values the people who actually build the foundation of the company, and as she spoke, the managers found themselves strangely moved because they were accustomed to hearing ambitious speeches, competitive strategies, and aggressive plans, but her perspective was rooted in empathy and practicality, a combination so rare that the entire room felt warmer. The CEO smiled slightly, leaning back in his chair as though a weight had lifted from his shoulders, and he asked her what motivated her to apply for a position so competitive when she knew others had more experience, more education, more corporate background, and she replied softly that she wasn't competing with anyone, she only wanted a chance to grow, to learn, and to contribute, and even if she failed she would still walk away with the satisfaction that she tried, and this answer, simple yet powerful, hit the CEO harder than she realized because he had spent years surrounded by people who wanted promotions, power, recognition, but here was a woman who only wanted to work sincerely. One of the managers checked her resume again, noticing something they had ignored earlier, not the degrees, not the job titles, but the consistency, the dedication, the long hours she had worked in small roles without ever complaining, and suddenly the simplicity that they once judged looked like a strength, the humility they mocked looked like professionalism, and the calmness they underestimated looked like wisdom. The CEO then decided to test her with something bigger, something strategic, something that required not just technical skill but also foresight, and he asked her how she would prevent the same problem from happening again in the future, a question that required leadership-level vision, and she paused for a moment, not because she was unsure, but because she wanted to give the answer careful thought, and then explained a step-by-step plan so clear, so practical, so efficient that the managers exchanged shocked glances again, realizing she wasn't just solving problems, she was preventing them. The CEO who had been frustrated all morning now felt a spark of excitement, a renewal of hope, as though the company's future finally had someone capable of protecting it, and all he could think as he looked at her was how ironic it was that the person who looked the least corporate was the one who understood the company better than anyone else. She didn't smile, didn't boast, didn't look proud, she simply sat quietly as though she had only done what she believed was necessary, and this humility made her even more compelling, so compelling that the CEO knew he had a decision to make, a decision that would challenge the prejudices of everyone outside waiting, a decision that would prove talent has its own silent power. The door opened slightly and an assistant stepped in to inform the CEO that the remaining candidates were getting restless, but he raised his hand gently, signaling her to wait outside, because he wasn't done with the woman sitting across from him, and something inside him told him that this interview was far more important than the rest combined. The managers looked at each other, aware that the CEO's unusual interest meant that this candidate was no longer just another name on the list, and one of them whispered under his breath that perhaps they were witnessing the start of something extraordinary, but no one dared say it aloud. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, completely unaware of the silent shift happening in the room, and the CEO leaned forward again, this time with curiosity instead of skepticism, asking her to walk him through her thought process, not the solution itself, but the way her mind approached complicated situations. She spoke softly, explaining that she always starts by removing fear from the equation because fear clouds clarity, then she breaks down large problems into smaller pieces, and finally she observes the human side of every situation because data may show the problem but people carry the truth behind it. As she spoke, the managers felt something they hadn't felt in years, a sense of grounding, a reminder of why they once loved their jobs before corporate pressure buried them under deadlines, and it was astonishing to them that someone so simple could reignite that spark. The CEO then asked her what she believed was the biggest flaw in the company's current system, a question he had not asked anyone else because he believed none of the other candidates had the insight to answer it meaningfully, but she looked at him with sincere eyes and responded that the biggest flaw was not in the system but in the mindset, a mindset that valued appearances over ability, confidence over character, and competition over collaboration, and the moment she said it, the room fell into another heavy silence, not because her words were harsh, but because they were true. The CEO's fingers stopped tapping, and he sat back stunned, because her words felt like a mirror reflecting everything he had ignored, and the managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats as if someone had gently peeled back layers of corporate habits they had been hiding behind for years. She didn't intend to expose anything, she was simply answering honestly, and that honesty carried a weight none of them could deny. Meanwhile, outside the interview room, the other candidates were whispering impatiently, wondering why her interview was taking so long, some even assuming she must be struggling inside or being lectured for wasting the panel's time, and one candidate arrogantly claimed that the CEO probably tolerated her only out of politeness because no company would seriously consider someone like that for a strategic role. They had no idea that while they sat boasting about their achievements, the woman they mocked was quietly unraveling insights that the company had overlooked for years. Back inside, the CEO asked her to describe a moment in her life where she faced a challenge she thought she could never overcome, hoping to understand her resilience, and she told them about a time she worked 2 small jobs at once just to support her younger siblings, about nights she stayed awake studying by candlelight, about mornings she walked miles because she couldn't afford transportation, and yet she never allowed hardship to turn into bitterness. Instead, she learned patience, learned discipline, learned how to stay grounded no matter what storms surrounded her, and as she spoke, the managers felt humbled because they realized that real strength often grows quietly, away from recognition or applause. Her story wasn't told dramatically, it wasn't exaggerated, it was just truth spoken with calm dignity, and that sincerity made her even more remarkable. The CEO looked at her differently now, not as a candidate but as someone who carried a rare blend of intelligence, humility, and emotional strength, qualities that couldn't be trained or taught. He asked her one final question, a question he usually reserved only for the person he intended to hire: what would she do if she were placed in a leadership position tomorrow? She hesitated for just a moment, then replied that leadership isn't about authority but about responsibility, that a leader's role isn't to stand above others but to stand among them, guiding, listening, and lifting those who feel unheard. Her answer hit the CEO so deeply that he felt a strange sting in his chest, not sadness, not regret, but realization. Realization that he had spent years promoting people who led with ambition instead of compassion, with pride instead of purpose. The managers, once doubtful, now found themselves studying her with admiration they couldn't hide even if they tried, and one of them quietly whispered, almost to himself, that she was exactly what the company needed but never knew it was searching for. The CEO slowly closed the file in front of him, no longer needing to review her documents because everything he needed to know was already in front of him, written not on paper but in her character. Outside, the other candidates heard footsteps approaching and sat up straight, ready for their turn, but they didn't know that something extraordinary was about to happen, something that would rewrite the ending they imagined for themselves. The assistant opened the door again, expecting the CEO to call in the next candidate, but instead she froze as she saw him standing up, something he rarely did during interviews, and the managers followed his lead, rising almost instinctively, their expressions transformed from skepticism to awe. And the simple woman who had walked in quietly now looked around with confusion because she didn't yet realize the magnitude of what she had just done. The CEO walked around the table, stopping right in front of her, and for a long moment he simply looked at her, as though processing every answer she had given, every insight she had offered, every moment of clarity she had brought into a company that had been drowning in complications. Then, in a voice calm yet firm, he said the words no one in the waiting room would ever expect: "The interview is over, and the job is yours." She blinked, stunned, her breath catching for a second as if she wasn't sure she heard him correctly, because she had walked into this building expecting nothing more than a chance, a possibility, but she never imagined that the CEO himself would personally choose her on the spot. The managers nodded in agreement, their expressions softening with genuine respect, and one of them stepped forward to apologize for underestimating her, admitting that her presence had taught them more in 1 hour than most corporate workshops had taught them in years. She didn't boast or smile triumphantly; instead, she lowered her gaze with humility, thanking them softly, her voice trembling not out of fear but out of gratitude, because for the first time in a long time she felt seen, valued, and understood. Outside, the other candidates were still preparing their rehearsed answers, adjusting their ties and fixing their hair, but when the CEO himself opened the interview room door and stepped out with her beside him, the entire waiting room fell silent. The arrogant candidate who had mocked her earlier almost dropped his resume, his jaw hanging open as he watched the CEO shake her hand warmly, guiding her toward the HR office with a respect none of them had received. Whispers exploded instantly, some in shock, some in confusion, and some in jealousy, but none of it mattered anymore because the woman who walked in with simplicity was now walking out with a position that none of them could earn, not because they weren't qualified but because they lacked what she possessed: clarity, humility, resilience, and the ability to see solutions where others only saw problems. As she walked through the hallways for her onboarding, employees glanced up, surprised to see the CEO accompanying a new hire personally, something he hadn't done in years, and while she remained modest, the CEO felt proud, knowing he had made the right decision, a decision that would shape the future of the company. Hours later, when she stepped into the office that would now be her workspace, she touched the edge of the desk gently, almost in disbelief. She remembered the long nights, the sacrifices, the years she spent working in unnoticed roles, the rejection letters, the interviews where she wasn't even given a chance to speak, and the way people always looked at her as though she didn't belong. Yet here she was, standing inside an office she had earned not through appearance but through brilliance and authenticity. She sat down slowly, feeling the weight of her journey settle into her heart, and for the first time she allowed a small smile to appear, not a smile of pride, but of relief, hope, and quiet triumph. Meanwhile, in the boardroom, the CEO spoke to the managers about restructuring the problem-solving department based on the very insights she had provided, telling them that they needed more thinkers like her, more people who understood the value of simplicity. He told them that the world often hides its brightest minds behind modest appearances, and that true leadership lies in recognizing potential where others fail to look. Days passed, and her presence in the company became a blessing no one had predicted. She solved issues before they escalated, brought harmony to teams that had been struggling for months, and inspired others with her calm, grounded approach. Employees who once felt invisible now found themselves heard because she made it her mission to listen to everyone, not just those who spoke the loudest. The CEO often observed her quietly from the corner of his office, amazed at how effortlessly she transformed the environment, and each time he saw her helping someone without expecting recognition, he felt grateful that he hadn't let prejudice cloud his judgment that day. Eventually, word spread throughout the company, not about her simplicity, not about her lack of fancy degrees, but about her brilliance, her kindness, and the way she carried wisdom in silence. People began approaching her for guidance, and she offered it freely, never holding herself above anyone else. One afternoon, as she stood near the window overlooking the city skyline, the CEO walked up beside her and told her that the company had decided to promote her faster than usual, not because they owed her anything, but because she had earned it through undeniable capability. She looked surprised again, her eyes reflecting the same quiet strength she had shown in the interview room, and she thanked him with the same humility that had won everyone's hearts. The CEO told her that sometimes life tests us by placing us in rooms where people underestimate us, but it rewards us when we choose to stay true to who we are. And in that moment, she realized that the world may judge appearances but success recognizes authenticity. As months passed, her journey became a silent legend in the company, a reminder that real talent doesn't shout, it proves itself. The candidates who mocked her faded into the background, forgotten in the shadows of their own arrogance, while she continued rising with grace, proving that the most powerful advantage a person can have is not confidence, not appearance, not status, but integrity, clarity, and the courage to remain simple in a world obsessed with complexity. And as she sat at her desk one morning, preparing to lead a new project, she whispered a quiet promise to herself that she would never become like those who once underestimated her. Instead, she would continue to open doors for people just like her, the unseen, the undervalued, the underestimated, because she knew better than anyone how life could change when someone finally gives you a chance. If this story inspired you even a little, make sure you like, share, and subscribe because your support helps powerful stories like this reach more people who need hope, strength, and motivation. Stay with us for more life-changing stories. Your presence means more than you know.